Hey guys, Apev here, and this is a video, or I guess audio, I recorded after beating Spec Ops The Line like 3 years ago, so it's not exactly up to date with my feelings towards the game, but I thought now would be a great time to post it since Spec Ops The Line is now no longer available in any online stores to my knowledge, so a lot of people are just going out and buying physical copies, which I think does show the value of the need for physical releases. But because of all this is happening, I feel like more new people are going to start playing the game. So if you've beat the game or are not too concerned with spoilers, I thought maybe this video might introduce some discussion since it's literally my immediate thoughts after beating the game. So I'm just pressing record and gonna talk, and maybe this video gets published someday, maybe it's not. I just completed Spec Ops The Line, which is a game I've had on PS3 forever. I stopped playing it after a very bad event happens in the game. I just finally beat it, and I have to say, the story is kind of all over the place, and I am going to be spoiling the entire thing in this video. I would click off now if you don't want the entire story ruined, because I'm going to be talking about basically the parts that I have problems with are the parts you discover at the very end of the game. So this spoils everything. So click off now if you ever plan on playing this game. But essentially, this game's a first-person shooter where none of your choices matter. And that is the kind of the point of the game, that no matter what you do, you're the bad guy. However, there's no reason throughout the entire game that really makes you the bad guy. And that is my main problem with it. All the plot twists happen after your character has supposedly died. Now, that is also up for debate, but I think one of the creators or writers for the game said they believed that the main character, Captain Walker, died in the helicopter crash in the opening sequence. And then you're basically just reliving everything up until that point, and then the rest after that is just in his mind. So I guess this is just happening while he's dying, but it almost is like they were creating a game, and then at that point they decided to make it about making choices that don't matter, and this weird like experiment on the player where you kind of have to interpret the story for yourself, which is a good idea, except when it seems like they were creating this fleshed out world with different factions and stuff, and then you kind of just have to make up whatever you want to believe at one point. Because after that point in the game, when you're discovering everything, if that's all a dream, you have absolutely no idea what's true. So some people like to believe the first part of the game is true before the helicopter crash, because Walker doesn't start becoming delusional or crazy until he accidentally kills a bunch of civilians, which is that big event that I stopped playing the game after that years ago. But if that's all in his head, then really none of the game, like, you can just make believe anything, and I don't really think that's good writing. For example, you believe the 33rd has gone rogue and is killing civilians, and there's clear evidence that they're doing that at the beginning of the game. And when you try to meet up with the 33rd at first, they're the ones who attack you. You repeatedly try to make contact with them, and they just keep fighting you. Your Staff Sergeant Lugo is trying to tell them that you're not CIA, and they're just fighting you. So throughout the entire game, you're having to fight in self-defense. So that really doesn't mean you're the bad guy. They're the ones who attacked you first in pretty much every single situation. And when you go to rescue the CIA operative, they're torturing civilians and executing civilians. So it's clear that the 33rd aren't the good guys. Some people have thought that there might be two factions of the 33rd, but that's also not pointed out very clearly in the game either. And again, if this is all in your head, the player could come up with any theory of which parts were real and which parts weren't. When you end up helping the CIA, you never really took their side. You just wanted a way to defeat the 33rd because they were killing civilians. Now, if the CIA were arming the civilians, which wasn't helping the situation at all, and it turns out the CIA just wanted to kill everybody, but you never picked that side. You never tried to do any of that. But for some reason, you're blamed because you were there and were basically used. At not a single point in the game does Walker intentionally do anything bad. Yet by the end of the game, he's blamed for everything. They're trying to make it reflect upon the player, like the only reason you were playing was because you wanted to be a hero, so you never stopped playing. However, I did stop playing. So what does that... that's maybe why this story doesn't make as much sense to me, because I did stop playing. The only reason I came back was because I was curious as to what would happen. Not because I wanted to be a hero, not because I was trying to force different choices, because I knew there was all the multiple endings are basically determined at the very end of the game, so no matter what choices you make don't matter. Now, the part where you accidentally kill civilians, that's what I'm having trouble understanding. Is the 33rd said they were helping, but they also believed there was no escape for the civilians. And it seemed like the CIA was also split, because that one guy you were trying to rescue apparently didn't want to kill everyone in the town. And in Walker's subconscious, if Conrad was dead the whole time, as the end of the game reveals to you, you blame it on Conrad forcing you to make that decision because there was no other choice. And the game literally gives you no other choice but to use I forget what it's called, I'm just going to call it napalm, that ends up killing the civilians. There's just so many questions up in the air that they leave for the player's interpretation. Whereas at the beginning of the game, or literally the first half of the game, it looks like they're creating this massive world with very complicated politics, but those complicated politics don't matter when you get to the end of the game and they basically tell you everything is within Walker's mind, so just make up whatever you want to believe. Conrad could have been alive. You don't come to the conclusion that Conrad was dead and this whole thing was in your mind until the very end of the game, after the helicopter crash where Walker supposedly died. So maybe all that mental torment that Conrad had put you through on the radio, blaming you for everything, when Walker dies in the helicopter crash, he's actually being convinced by Conrad that Conrad never existed when all this was happening. He actually convinces himself that the radio was broken instead of, in the game's canon, I don't know, because there is no canon, they show you that the radio was broken and Conrad was never talking to you. Could that all have been in Walker's mind? I mean, literally, because the whole game, not a single part of the game, the only part of the game that we know is true is that helicopter fight at the very beginning of the game. So they did a really good job at getting people talking. Just to me, it seems like halfway through the game, they decided to make it about this reflection upon the player, or just Walker's mind. And originally, they were probably making just this really in-depth shooter where you were discovering who was behind all this chaos. The guy on the radio, I don't even sure. The radio man, he was like a ex-journalist. And at the beginning, it seemed like he was leading the 33rd. But from everything that I've read, they never explained why the radio man ended up leading anybody. I read some things in the game, like the things that you find, that he just kind of wanted to give people hope, but he is clearly commanding soldiers or telling them where you are. So he's definitely linked with the 33rd. Why was the 33rd defending him? What was his link to everything? I think I even found some entries where the radio man was talking to Conrad, and it seemed like Conrad was going to put him into some position of authority. And there was also intel that I found when Conrad, I guess, turned on the United States flag. Was that all in Walker's mind? Because that seems to point that Conrad did caused the 33rd to turn into what it did. That could be part of the canon, and that's going off of he could have died in a helicopter crash. What I went with, if I were to make up my own canon, everyone survived the helicopter crash, and the game continues on from there. There's also no real explanation towards the end of the game when it seems like the soldiers are surrendering to Walker. That just seemed completely out of the blue, because at the beginning of the game they clearly weren't surrendering to Walker. So it doesn't seem like that could have been in his head. Otherwise, that guy you rescue from the CIA agents wouldn't have run and told the rest of the 33rd that you were CIA. So I guess under my belief, he just started losing his mind after that. And it seems like what the game would want you to believe without all these intricacies is that Walker was dead the entire time. You had gone crazy because you killed a bunch of civilians on accident. There's absolutely no indication of whether 33rd was good or bad or just all over the place out of control because they had no leader. You somehow aren't killed by the 33rd after they kill Adams. You just lay on the ground and somehow manage to make it all the way up to where Conrad committed suicide. And then this impersonation of Conrad who's in your head, who may or may not have made a painting, tries to convince you to kill yourself because this is all your fault. Even though really throughout the game, none of this was your fault. The CIA was always going to try to destroy the water supply, and you never were the aggressor towards the 33rd. They were the ones who gave you no choice. Also, between Adams and Lugo, because Adams was the one who forced you to use the white phosphorus, that's what it's called. Despite him being the, peaceful one throughout the entire game. He always wanted to save the civilians. He always thought Lugo was taking things too far. I have no idea why, it's clear that Adams kind of broke down after the 33rd used white phosphorus. So he was like, well, we'll use white phosphorus against him. But that really didn't seem like an Adams thing to do. That was another weird thing with the writing was I feel like Lugo should have been the one to want to use the white phosphorus. But anyways, if everything made it to that point, I ended up shooting Walker's consciousness of Conrad. And to me, that was kind of like resisting against this force that's saying it's all his fault, because I don't believe it is all Walker's fault. Yeah, he probably should have turned around or right after using the white phosphorus and just radioed command. I have no idea why they never radioed command. I thought they lost signal, but it's clear that you can contact them at the end of the game. And it's just like, we were there to do recon. Why didn't we go back? And I guess that's the entire point of the game, is like everything you did was pointless. And then at the end of the credits, if you surrender your weapon, a soldier asks you as you're driving back home, and Walker's like, it's all over. The soldier asks you, how did you survive this? And Walker replies, who says I did? Or something along those lines. Which again seems to point at the fact that he actually died in that helicopter crash. But I don't want to believe he died in that helicopter crash, because that just seems to make the entire game even more pointless. I don't think it's as bleak as the game tries to convince you of, that he's just the worst guy ever, and that the 33rd were somehow good guys when you witness them torturing people. Again, there's a lot of people who say there's two 33rds, and most of the time you're fighting the loyalists who are the bad guys, and then there's rebel 33rds. I'm still not sure what they were doing with all those civilians that you accidentally killed with the white phosphorus, because up until that point, they definitely weren't treating the civilians well. They were pretty much executing every one of the ones they captured, and they couldn't have just, helped them all evacuate, because the 33rd kept saying that they couldn't evacuate, and that's why they were doing all this stuff. Another thing is how the civilians always treated you. I can understand them treating you that way because you helped contribute to the water being destroyed, but you kept telling them you were there to help. You were there to help them evacuate. It's clear at the end of the game that that was possible, unless we're going to say that was completely pointless too, pretty much any part of this game you could say was pointless, which is why I think it was kind of bad writing. But if you could have called in help that entire time, I don't know why the civilians never listened to you, why they essentially lynched Lugo. I mean, that was after the helicopter crash, so don't really know why that happened. What they were actually yelling at you about when you defeated the 33rd in the very beginning, when you're in like that mall, that was another thing. The radio man was just kept talking about how this is all their fault if only they listened with the plan. So it was like they were rounding up civilians because they were resisting the 33rd. But once you defeat the 33rd, it seems like all the civilians are upset at you. So what part of the 33rd was made up and what was in Walker's head? Were the 33rd the good guys? Was that voice of the radio man basically explicitly pointing out that they were prisoners of war? Was that in Walker's head? Like, I can understand your conversations with Conrad not being real, but the conversations with the radio man, those had to be real because Lugo ends up killing the radio man because of he blames the radio man for everything. That also seemed out of nowhere. Like if Lugo had lost it that much where he could seem friendly to the radio man and then immediately shoot him in the head, I have no idea why Lugo wasn't the one to promote using white phosphorus when Adams through the entire game was usually the peacekeeper. I'm sure people, like, because everyone interprets it differently, people are going to have their own 2 cents on this, and that's what gets people talking. It definitely handles some deep topics. Definitely better than a lot of other first-person shooters where it's just like good guy, bad guy, shoot at each other. Overall, I would say it's a really good game, and I would encourage people to play it. I know I kind of just ruined it for everyone. Honestly, my greatest appeal of it is this world that they were building at the beginning of the game, not the whatever the heck was going on with Captain Walker by the end of the game. I would love to see a sequel, although it would be impossible with most of the endings that they seem to be more canon. I feel like if they did bring it back, it would probably be butchered, so it's probably good that it ended the way it did. I really don't know what to say. It's like, it has some of the best writing and also some of the worst plot holes. Like, because I would say it's lazy writing that they leave it up to the interpretation of the player, but it's clear that through 80% of the production, they were not being lazy. And I don't think they were being lazy. I just don't agree, I guess, with their open-ended approach. Like, if Walker was going to be the bad guy, they could have showed more to make it appear that Walker was the bad guy. Maybe show that he was the one who killed the commanding officers who were under Conrad, or show that maybe he was the one who killed the radio man and it wasn't Lugo. Like, things that he could have been remembering differently. It's just weird. Everyone hates you, and there's really no example as to why. Also, when I cannot believe they actually, now that I'm remembering this, I can't believe they never pointed it out. When you go to see Conrad, you're in a big aquarium. They claimed that they were out of water. I thought, like, as soon as you saw Conrad, you were going to be like, you had water this entire time? But no one even mentions that. What symbolism does that hold? That he walked into an aquarium, which is that the whole problem, the whole reason the whole entire place hated you was because there was no water. You could have been the good guy also if you just went downstairs and offered everyone water. I have just okay. Thanks for watching if this ever comes out. See ya.